Hi, everyone. Welcome to the news desk. I am here with Bhavin Shah, the VP and GM of Clara. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you, Alison.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I have a couple of questions for you around Agile and DevOps practices. And while there's no denying the potential of Agile and DevOps practices, what are some of the critical barriers that limit the success rates of these practices?
That's a great question, and we get asked that all the time. It depends on where you are in the maturity spectrum from a company perspective. And it doesn't matter if you're a young company, a medium-sized company, a large or an extra-large company. What we've seen in our experiences is that the correlation and the challenges are different. Let's start with a few critical ones. So I think one of the first few ones that come to mind on the more of the softer side of things are the cultural challenges, right? Just because you think you want to do Agile DevOps and you start at the implementation layer, it doesn't automatically make you Agile DevOps compliant. There has to be cultural alignment in that direction in terms of how you operate, and other practices that support Agile DevOps come into play. Okay. Now, for that, another critical barrier that comes in is the buy-in. Because if there is no buy-in, and I mean buy-in right at the executive layer down to the person implementing, you cannot have one or two teams running a sprint and then saying, hey, I'm Agile compliant, or run a pipeline and I'm saying I'm DevOps compliant. Because what happens is when you start measuring certain performance criteria and take it up to management, it has a deer in the headlight moment. And we've seen that even with large mature organizations where they struggle, because there's so much years of legacy mired into how companies have been operating that just can't be discarded by flipping a switch and saying I'm Agile DevOps compliant, right? The third critical barrier, so one is culture and buy-in. The second is, we talked about legacy and overcoming that through buy-in. But the third and most important is the complexity. The complexity can come in many ways. Complexity in terms of morphing your processes to make them more Agile DevOps compliant, but even in your tool chain, because you have a number of tools. Now, let's say you decided there is buy-in to move in that direction. How do you connect the dots with that complex tool chain and start getting visibility? So oftentimes we hear people saying, hey, we are ready, but where do we get started?
Yeah,
how do we get started? How do we get started? And what do we measure? And is that the right thing to measure for us because we're just getting started? Because the world is measuring something else, right? So oftentimes the comparison causes confusion. And so our recommendation is, hey, start with your basics and then, in a feedback iterative mode, keep correcting yourself. So this is another barrier that companies face before they can say they're Agile DevOps ready and compliant.
Right. So given that the Agile and DevOps tool chain that you were just talking about and how it's grown exponentially, what are some of those pathways that we're talking about and how has Clara helped that?
That's another very relevant question, Alison. So what happens is as organizations mature and as new teams come in, people have a lot of choices to make. And many times what happens is, especially if the organization has grown through acquisitions, people bring their own tools with them. And or if teams are given a choice, teams tend to pick different tools. Now, how do you work on a per team basis, keeping their tool chain of preference in mind and drive end-to-end visibility? That's where the value is, right? Now, what we try and do with companies is instead of trying to force fit tools and say, no, you got to use this certain tool chain. What we look at is how we can seamlessly drive end-to-end visibility, no matter what your tool chain is. And then at a team level, you get what you want with your tools, but at an organizational level, you try and standardize what you measure. So I think driving that end-to-end visibility across the cycle is important. Also, the success criteria and what you want to measure. For example, just because there are certain guidelines available in the market, let's take one example with DevOps. There is a popular thing called the DORA metrics. The DevOps Research and Assessment Group came out with these metrics. Now, they are great guidelines. But if you as an organization are not ready to get to that stage, should you just stop doing anything? Or can you start small? Can you start with 1 or 2 metrics, get those going? And not only those metrics, but the drivers on how you can move the needle on those. So in fact, we're going to do a session at the Agile DevOps East conference where we're going to talk about DORA metrics and even the barriers to get to that stage and some of the drivers that you can look at to start measuring as you think about refining your processes and then improving the performance on those metrics.
Excellent. So with enterprise automation becoming a huge priority, and there's also a host of solutions available in the market to choose from, what differentiates Clara from that perspective?
So without worrying about Clara, I think there are 3 aspects, and then I'll bring Clara into the picture here, because obviously we're passionate about Clara and how Clara can help solve problems for people. How you go about implementing metrics or drive visibility, how you bring sustenance in them, and how do you scale that to different teams, different parts of the organization, and different applications. Now, there are certain drivers, and that's where I'll focus on Clara, which are important. One is, how do you contextually correlate across these independent data silos? We call them disparate tools that generate these independent data silos. How do you connect the dots and contextually correlate it without going through a whole lot of headache? How do you make it dynamic? Because if this thing is a constantly moving target, and how do you make it dynamic? The next thing is, how do you bring automation, but injected with a little bit of intelligence? So let me give you an example. People collect tickets in a ticketing system. How do you add some intelligence before automatically synchronizing it, or what we call writing back to another tool, right? And more importantly, as on the scaling side, as new tools come in, how can you quickly onboard new tools so that your pipeline, even if it continues to evolve, or you're swapping tools, you can sustain that growth easily and continue to get your ultimate business outcome. So those are the drivers. Obviously, we focus on making those available in our product, and that differentiates us because we keep the organization's flexibility and customization needs in mind as we look to an overall business outcome.
Got you. So what tools does Clara connect with, and what happens if a company is already using other proprietary tools?
So we, out of the box, connect to over 50 different tools, applications, platforms, databases, call it whatever data sources you may want. And Clara can also bring in user inputs. And where this is important is as you think of planning scenarios, your what if scenarios, user inputs, data collection is very, very important. Now, companies have always told us, whether in retail, media, telecom, unified communications, that look, we have a lot of history. We have a lot of data from the past. And more importantly, we have some proprietary tools. Anything that is willing to talk to us using standard APIs or standard protocol connectivity, we can easily connect to them. And this is without having to do any programming per se. So companies have taken, let's say, a hierarchy of an organization, which you normally don't find in any of your usual DevOps tools, obviously, but use that to drive visibility in terms of, which team, under which director, under which VP, under what C-level initiative is driving a certain pipeline, and what do we do with that? So those kinds of options are definitely possible.
That's awesome. So does Clara also employ some machine learning and artificial intelligence to bring that into the game too? That's a big thing right now, everywhere, of course.
It's a hot topic. I always say, hey, start simple. Start with basic computations where you can apply Excel-like formulas. And then, yes, there is always machine learning and artificial intelligence in the form of unsupervised learning algorithms, prediction, forecasting. And of course, the data has to be in a certain way before you can get there. But yes, we do support inbuilt models and third-party models along with computation to give you the intelligence you need.
That's awesome. So are there any programming skills required to work on Clara?
That's the beauty of it. Even business users can use Clara. There are no programming skills required. At the end of the day, if you know Excel-like formulas and if you like to play with data and that's your passion, welcome aboard. That's all we say, right?
That's
give it a
wonderful.
shot.
Awesome. Well, where can people find out more about Clara?
Well, we're everywhere. So, of course, we have our website, Clara.io. You can find us on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Of course, you can email us, info@Clara.io, or give us a call. I'm based in California, and so are our team members. And you can look it up on our website and reach out to us.
That's wonderful. Thank you for being with me today. I really appreciate it. And it's great to see you, and we'll see you at the conference.
Thank you very much, Allison. Thanks for having me here. And I hope everyone is and continues to remain healthy and safe. And we look forward to being at the conference.
Me too. Thank you. Take care.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.